All right, so I am here with another video. I made a video about a month ago, and I don't recommend anybody watch it. It was, I think I was really tired that day, and I was rambling the entire time. It was basically about nothing. It was nothing important. It was just mostly a guide of just like a little intro to a long intro to what my journey was to get to Korean. So it's a lot of like personal, anecdotal, not very interesting stories. It's not good content. I don't recommend watching it. Anyway, with that out of the way, I'm here to talk about my first month with MIA. And for me, it has been a really interesting experience, I have to say. And for those of you who don't know what MIA is, you probably, you probably know if you're watching this video. But mass immersion approach, and it is essentially a way to really create a hyper focused and extreme, like a kind of an artificial, really focused environment where you are immersed constantly in content. So Korean, for Korean, that means watching a lot of web dramas, listening to a lot of the same web dramas, and also listening to podcasts and any spoken Korean that I can, basically. So it's been a month, and what are my first overview thoughts? It can be really extreme, honestly. It's really simple. It's a simple concept, but it's really something else to really transfer your life over to listening to non-stop Korean. And that's basically what I started to do. So I used to listen to a lot of podcasts throughout the day. I was working 2 jobs, and one of my jobs allowed me to wear my headphones. I was in a back room for most of the time. It didn't bug anybody to have a headphone in my ear. So I was listening to podcasts anyway. And on my way to work or doing chores and stuff, I was pretty much listening to podcasts. So that transition for me wasn't really that difficult as far as habit goes. And that's definitely one of the big key points about switching to ACAT, or all Korean all the time, MIA essentially, is that those habits are kind of the cornerstone of what you do. So I was listening to podcasts, and it was really easy for me to just flip that over, start listening to Korean, spoken Korean. The big difference comes in, obviously, the ability to understand any of that. And it's a little disorienting. When you go from listening to things constantly that you can understand, for me in English, I can understand everything I come across, and it's rare that I don't understand something, and I infer through context, and generally I don't come across many problems, normal for a native speaker of English. So to go from that to understanding, when I started listening to Korean, when I started this exactly 1 month ago, my listening skills were basically non-existent. It was complete gibberish. I would listen to some spoken Korean, and I just couldn't make out anything. It all seemed way too fast, and it was all I had a small vocabulary to start with, but it didn't feel like that helped me. Before the 1 month of MIA, I studied for 2 months, kind of using traditional sort of methods, studying a bit of grammar, and and just taking like small lessons, small beginner lessons, and most of it had to do with grammar or integrating vocabulary with those pieces of grammar that I was using. And it was always very difficult to kind of catch up to that and keep up with making it all make sense in my mind. So when I started listening to the Korean stuff, at first it was just gibberish, and it was like that for a few days. But I was listening to it for about 8 hours a day, and I was very surprised to find out within the first 3 days that I started hearing all of these little things that I knew. I had done, I had just barely started up Anki maybe a week or two before. I started at MIA, and so I had started drilling a little bit of vocabulary, and then I continued to do that. I continued to be more focused on that with MIA. But this vocab that I learned either from the traditional learning methods, dabbling in Lingodeer and learning the Talk to Me in Korean lessons from lesson 1, I began to like pick out those little things, pick out like something would pop out at me. And it started happening kind of it hit me by surprise. It started all happening sort of around the same time at about 3 or 4 days. A lot of the little basic low-hanging fruit just started popping out, and I guess it was happening a little bit right when I started. I don't want to say that my listening was non-existent, but it was so few. Like I would recognize the names of fruits, just like really if there were somebody was talking about it, or 친구, friend. Oh, excuse me. Allergy season. House, friends, basic nouns, and things like that. So that was the extent of what I could listen. But anything like verb conjugations, I couldn't quite pick out, and it all just sounded way too fast. It all sounded like every native speaker was speaking way too quickly. So after a couple of days, what the difference that started happening after a few days was, it went all from sounding like a bunch of like blah 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 blah, blah too fast to like something more like blah bitty blah 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 bitty blah 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 blah, with words mixed in that I recognized. So it was that a shift happened without me trying, just through sheer listening to a lot of it, where I started picking out individual words, and even if I didn't understand them, I could pick out more and more and more. As time went on, it became more enunciated and more distinct between each individual word, and even though a lot of the stuff I haven't come across yet, I could kind of see myself being able to understand it. So that was like a big, like my first initial sort of breakthrough with the process, just kind of the first milestone that happened. Things started becoming more enunciated. So I want to talk a little bit about, what I was doing. I was studying Anki, just basically adding from a frequency deck to try to continue adding in bits of my vocabulary to make something stick, because when you start off as a beginner, you don't have a huge vocabulary. None of your input is comprehensive, so listening to it is still helping, because like I said, that shift where you start hearing the sounds and you start being able to parse out the individual portions of it and making sense, but you need the vocab. And you need a little bit of grammar too. And the way that I approached it was, before I hit MIA, I was trying to do exercises and making sentences and stuff. It all felt like really forced. It felt like homework, which I hated. Never was a fan of homework in school, so that was like really turning me off to studying. But I switched to doing grammar lessons that were very short. And I was just reading through the Talk to Me in Korean stuff, and they've got, it's kind of the perfect, in my opinion, the perfect little bite size. There are other free resources that are also just as valid, but if you can find a resource that is, here's the grammar point, and here is the basic usages that it's used in, this is kind of what it conveys, here are some examples. And that's all that the Talk to Me in Korean stuff is. So it was really easy for me to spend 15-20 minutes going through one or maybe two. I started doing a lot of times I started doing 2 lessons at a time and just adding those to an Anki flashcard. So I would add the sentence with the new grammar point, maybe the new conjugation or the new particle type thing, and I would put the translation on the other side, as well as a brief explanation about what that grammar point is. And the reason you do this is because you don't want to get caught up in trying to, and other people have talked about this. Matt's talked about this, and then Brit versus Japan, he's also talked about this. Other people have talked about it. You don't want to rely too much on grammar. It's got to be quick. You got to treat it like it's vocab. You just briefly go over it, and then you try to recognize it, because the point is you start to see this stuff pop out in your immersion. So I started, as I went through, I would learn these new points, and after a couple of days, or sometimes on that same day, I would start to hear it in the stuff I was immersing in. And so this process continues and continues. It's continued for a month, and sometimes there's a little bit of a lag time in between when I learn something and when I start hearing it. But once you hear it more and more and more. It's like once your brain consciously makes that connection, you start to recognize it everywhere. And so then you hear it in your immersion, and that's where it sticks. That's where it holds together. That's where it starts building in the map. That's what that means. You see it in the context of the video you're watching, in the drama, or the show, whatever type of content you use. So yeah, that's been really cool. It's just seeing all these little bits, come together. So I made a list of topics that I wanted to cover. I made it throughout the past couple of weeks, just key points. So this is not really in order. It's not really in a great order, but it's just what I wrote down. So I wrote down about how I had to discover different types of content and figure out what was right for me at different points of my journey. And at first, because I had a ground in fruits and veggies vocab, I was watching a lot of cooking shows, and I found a couple of cooking shows that were really, they had a person who was narrating their own actions and what they're talking about, a little bit of sense of humor, and describing everything that they're doing, and then naming all of the ingredients. So it's just easy. It's easy reps. It's easy gains, quick gains, and that's what I've learned is the most important thing. Is you want to go with the path of least resistance as far as gains go, and you want to increase your vocabulary wherever it's easiest, because the more you increase your vocabulary, the more able you are to add new vocabulary. It all makes sense together. So I learned to be willing to try interesting, diverse content. There was a lot of stuff that I didn't like. I also found that I became kind of a fan of these web dramas. A lot of times there are high school age or college age students, and it's about their daily lives, and it's nothing deep. It's nothing too complicated. It's all simple ideas. They're just talking about food, talking about relationships, talking about their friends, their enemies, just simple social stuff. But it's really kind of coherent, cohesive point of learning, as far as getting a little bit used to the culture, even though it's curated obviously for television and entertainment purposes. But the web dramas, they speak with these short sentences like teenagers, so they're able, but it's not dumbed down to the point of being kids content. It's just simple content. So I think it's a really good starting point. Episodes are usually very short. So it was an easy point for me to start watching this immersive content. And I wouldn't have expected. I don't watch that kind of stuff in English. I have no reason to. I'm not learning anything new, so I don't find it that interesting. But because it's so close to the level when you're a beginner, you are able to access a lot of it. And it's stuff that you are going to understand. It's going to be, a lot of it will be a part of your life. Your daily routines, your friends, you're communicating with people around you, and food, just normal stuff. Let's see here. That's it. I covered a lot of this stuff. And then, I wanted to talk briefly about the partially active immersion that I've been doing. Because of my work and because of my lifestyle, I've been able to hit a lot of partially active listening. And most days I have 10, 12 hours to be able to dedicate to partially active listening while I'm doing other things that don't take much mental effort, but require me to be busy doing something else. I can't just sit and divide and give my undivided attention to it. And at first I was wondering how much that's going to be a benefit, but I've seen distinct benefits, even as a beginner, to partially active listening, because a lot of these shows, I know the shows and I listen to them over and over again. I have YouTube Premium, so I listen at work I would listen to these web dramas. I put them in a playlist, hit repeat, and just play them over and over again. And it's really easy for me to think it wasn't working, but then I started noticing that I was picking out new things that I had learned, new grammar, new vocab in this content, just while I was partially listening at work or somewhere else. And that made me realize that there's something to it. I was actually learning. By learning, I mean like acquiring this understanding of these words through partially active listening. So I wasn't learning new concepts. Like I wasn't able to look up in a dictionary what something meant or study a grammar point. But to me, that's just like a kickstart, a part of the learning. The real learning happens when you connect it with something real, like connect it with something else. You build that connection in your brain that is between an event or experience and that concept, that word. So that's where the true language acquisition comes from. And that was happening. So I'm a full believer now in the partially active listening, and I learned that really fast, within the first week. And so for the last month, I've been doing it as much as possible. I've been getting a ton of hours in. Now, I would prefer active listening because I catch a little bit more. But some days I'm only able to get 1 hour of active listening, or 1 hour of active listening, and then maybe a couple of other small sessions, and then the rest of it is mostly partially with bits of active listening in downtime, down moments. So a lot of days were 2 hours. Some days were a lot. Some days I was doing 3 or 4 hours. And then you want so I've discovered through some trial and error, you definitely want a balance of immersion, grammar, and vocab. I found that a little bit of grammar goes a long way because it increases, a little bit of grammar can increase your comprehensibility quite a bit. Just all the different points where it comes up. And I would find that I was too overwhelmed if I started learning, Sometimes 3 was a little bit too much in a day because I wouldn't have time to like let it sink in before discovering it in my immersion. And then more than like 10 new vocab, I struggled. I had a period of time where my Anki reps were just getting out of control because I was repeating stuff over and over again. And then I reined that back in, and I kind of got that sorted out. I went through and did all of the low-key Anki stuff. Speaking of Anki, I got my Anki situated and got my settings set to something that was pretty conservative in terms of difficulty, and low intervals. I did follow the guides that Matt has made on the MIA site though, and I used those kind of as a starting point and leaned towards like the more conservative approach, rather than being really gung-ho and aggressive, and having long intervals, just because I knew that I'm struggling in this beginning phase to catch on to anything, and then a lot of repetition of these things is not going to hurt. I'm going to forget a lot, and in fact that's exactly what has happened a lot of times. Is there have been a lot of days where I've forgotten words, and I've over the past month I think I've made like something like 30-40 leeches, failing a card over and over again. But a lot of those I went back after a week or so, added back into my deck, and were just fine. Or they seem to be so far. It's not been a really long time to see how that has affected everything, but it's going pretty well. It's that all that repetition seems to be working. So I think my deck right now has about 550 words, 550 cards. Some of that is grammar, most of it's vocab, and then I recently, in the past 4 or 5 days, started getting into subs to SRS and condensed audio, and the subs to SRS has been kind of great because I've done 2 things. I've just gone through and manually found sentences from these shows that I watched that are just one new word that I didn't know yet, and I've noticed my ability to comprehend that not only in that scene when re-listening to it or rewatching it again, but also elsewhere. And those seem really effective for me as a means of learning the language. And then the condensed audio is cool. I mean, that's just I don't have a lot of experience with it yet because I've only done a couple of shows, but it's just like supercharged immersion, and I'm looking forward to putting more of it on. So I want to talk a little bit about peripheral things not directly related to language, and that's lifestyle choices to set yourself up for success. And something that I kind of experimented with not doing or doing, so the 3 main points, in my opinion, are sleep. That's the big one. You need to get major sleep if you want to retain this stuff, and that goes with learning anything. I've always found, if you exercise, you need the sleep to build the muscle, and for your brain to strengthen nerve connections and stuff. And it's no different with something intellectual or learned, conceptual, and that goes. Your brain will figure out efficient wirings when you sleep for new information, and it will build it into a model that's effective. And that's just how we learn things. You can learn and practice and train and do whatever it is in the day, and you do that every day, and at nighttime your brain goes through this crazy magical process where it just kind of optimizes things and makes them more accessible, and it optimizes towards doing things that need to adapt to the situation that you're in. If you're training hard for a marathon, your brain's going to be trying to figure out mappings, neural mappings in the body, well, also in the mind, in your brain, to make that goal easier, because it is an obstacle that it faces every day. If you're training for a marathon, you're training every day. So that's how that obviously works. It's not really new to anybody, but it's worth mentioning. The days where I didn't get very much sleep, those were my worst Anki repping days. And those were also the days where my attention was the lowest. So I'm very aware of my own personal limitations when it comes to my attention. And I know that if I'm not well rested, my attention, my ability to direct my attention suffers greatly. So I have to be, like, if you want an example of this, go torture yourself by watching the last video that I made on the channel. I didn't get very much sleep for a few days. Got really poor sleep, actually. But the days where I did get sleep, last night is a good example. 8 hours. I did my Anki reps, and it's just like a breeze. So you need to get sleep, or you're not going to learn. I hope I hammered that point, fully. But it's like, if you just show up, get sleep, you're gonna make progress. That's really what it comes down to. You do the reps, do the immersion, do the passive listening, sleep, and put in the minimum amount of effort, and you'll succeed. At least that seems to be the case. Exercise, I think it's really important. That also helps my attention, and it reduces, like, I have a back issue, and so if I have a specific routine and sets of routines in a program that I do that helps alleviate the tightness that I get in my back and the lower back and the pain and stuff like that allows me to more comfortably sit, and I just feel like it's one less thing that my body and mind has to focus on. Is if I'm exercise, everything's working pretty well, good blood flow, circulation, and I'm relaxed, and that's also a little bit of dopamine production. It's just good for a healthy mind and a positive mind state, so that you're not getting burnt out. It's important to interject exercise in your daily routine, in my opinion. And 10 minutes is like enough to make an impact. It's going to make a cumulative positive impact 10 minutes a day. Like it really, you don't have to bust your back. So I know this video is getting long, but there's a couple more things. Meditation. I definitely think that meditation is important. I know Matt's talked about this. He's also a fan of meditation. And it's just one more thing that it reduces the noise to signal ratio for everything, so that you are a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more calm, a little more collected, a little more focused, and all these little tiny benefits, for if we're talking in terms of benefits, they add up, and they help you to focus on your immersion. The things, it means that if your mind is a bunch of chaos and you try to add a little bit of a new word in there, that chaos is going to cover up a lot of your focus and your effort in order to make that one word. If that chaos is smoothed a little bit, that one word is going to stick out in a new way. It's kind of like a weird analogy, but that's kind of how I view it. And it's just things for me sink in more effectively. So the days where I didn't, haven't been meditating, because it was kind of a little bit half and half for me. I was going through periods of time where I was meditating more, meditating less. It's easy just to see, in my Anki stats, those days where I meditated, if I started meditating a few days in a row, the reviews were just better. I was getting a little bit better sleep on those days. It all adds up. For me, it's like a very sort of comprehensible, holistic view. I see it all as together. I'm really committed to wanting to make this work and to prove that it can work. So I'm trying to modify all my habits, in a way that makes it easy to keep going and makes it fun and makes it interesting. And which brings me to my last point that I had written down here, prioritizing MIA. There's been a lot of things that I've come to realize that I didn't really need in my life if I wanted to focus on MIA, focus on the immersion, and focus on learning and acquiring the language. So I was working 2 jobs. Excuse me. I was working 2 jobs, and one of them did not allow me to wear headphones while I was working. I was working with people, just not. I understand that it's not a professional thing. And I also had to travel a bit. And so it took a lot more time out of my day, and it was also meant that I was working 6 or 7 days a week between the 2 jobs. And that leaves a lot less time for immersion and studying, and it makes me more exhausted and harder to, it makes it a little bit harder to stay motivated. Ultimately, it hasn't been an issue, but I could see that it would become an issue given enough time. And so I made the decision to switch to working full-time at one job next to my house. It's like a 5-minute drive away. If that, it's like very close. I can walk there in 15 minutes, which I often do if the weather's great. And, so there's that. And the other thing is I was pretty big into Rocket League, and I'm on a team. It's like an amateur team in a competitive league, and it's all just for fun and everything. But there's this sort of expectation. You want to get better. You don't want to let down your team. You want to improve. You want to win games, and so you want to train. And I literally do drills and practice mechanics and drills and things in the game, and play regularly. And I have been wondering how much of that I want in my life based on MIA. And I think I've realized that there are a lot of little things that I have to kind of decide if I want to include. And I did decide that I want to cut back my Rocket League time because this has become so much more important to me. It's become a more meaningful use of my time, even though it's been a lot of fun playing Rocket League. So I've moved on to try to focus my Rocket League hobby, and kind of reduce the amount of time that I'm spending doing that, so that I can then spend more time immersing. And of course, while I play Rocket League, the client is all in Korean, and I listen to immersive content while I'm doing it, while I'm training and stuff. So it's not completely wasted time, or in terms of MIA. So I think I'm still gonna keep doing it, but it's been interesting to me coming across this sort of decision that I've had to make, and there's been a lot of them that kind of pop up over time, and more will pop up, I'm sure, where I'll have to decide how much of the MIA I want to prioritize and how much of other things. I'm a single guy, and I don't have a lot of responsibilities, so this is kind of the ultimate it's a perfect time for me to be doing this kind of stuff. And I want to take advantage of it, make the most of it. So yeah, that's about it. My, a little bit, probably too much advice in this one, but, I feel like there's a lot of things that, I tried to kind of frame it in the terms of my experience of what's going on and what I've learned. My comprehension ability has gone up quite a bit since I started, I feel like and I've gone through lessons, the level 2 and level 3 of Talk to Me in Korean's grammar lessons in the last month. The 2 months prior to that, when I was starting to study, it took me 2 months to do one, and now I did 1 month to do 2 levels. And I feel like it's because that's just the pace that I have to go at to keep up with the immersion. There's just so much bandwidth. The immersion creates so much bandwidth for learning. It creates an environment where you have opportunities to make sense of this stuff you're learning so much and really drill it in. So it's been really exciting. I'm looking forward to the next coming months. I don't know if I'm going to do an update in a month. I don't know how useful it's going to be, how much things will change. I might wait another month, do 2 months, and have like a 3-month update point. We'll see. But yeah, I think that covers just about all of it. I want to say that I've been spending a lot of time on a Discord with a few other people who are also doing the MIA for Korean, and it's been great to like share resources and like share ideas, and also just to BS and to make friends with people who are into the same thing. I find that I get along well with a lot of them, and that with everybody there, and there's like a lot of fun. I spend a little bit too much time some days because it's like I'm cutting down everything so much. I'm even trying to it's going crazy. I'm trying to cut down on my sugar and my music listening and stuff, because it's like extra. It's just like dopamine stimulating, and I'm trying to like conserve that for use in learning, because that's part of like the learning acquisition process for the brain. It requires that, and you kind of have a little bit of a limited supply throughout the day, which also recharges at night. It's another reason to keep sleeping. So yeah, it's been a little crazy, but they've been good fun in the Discord and the subreddit. There's a subreddit on Reddit called AKATT, so go check it out if you're interested. I think there's a link to the Discord there, so if you're into this, go check it out. If you're not into this and you're already listening to this much of this video, it's almost 40 minutes long, Jesus, then that's a little crazy, but you should probably check it out if you're interested. So yeah, I guess that is just about everything. I'm looking forward to the rest of my day immersing. I have the day off today, so I'm going to get a lot of stuff in, and I look forward to the next coming months. I'm excited. So we'll see how it goes. I'll catch you next time.